We are happy to have you with us for our second webinar for the Autobody Collision PLC group. We hope that you've fared well through all the cold weather and school closings and everything and are ready to jump in for our session today. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as you probably know, today's session is going to be focusing on some technical reading and writing skills, some strategies and some ideas that you can bring into your classroom. And just to start out with a sort of a morning funny, there's a cute little cartoon here that may be indicative of your experience. Hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll feel differently. But our focus today is really on technical reading, as I said, and some practical strategies that you'll be able to take into the classroom. And even though you're not a reading teacher, most of you haven't been trained as a reading teacher or reading specialist, it is part of everyone's classroom, making sure that students can understand and read their texts and comprehend the information that's in there. So certainly we want to make sure that you're equipped to work with your students in that regard. Okay, good. Next slide, please. So who's in the room today? Myself, Jennifer Grams, and I'm joined by Kathy Schick, who is part of our Meter Consulting team. Kathy will be leading our presentation today, and as many of you may know, Kathy is a reading specialist. She is currently on leave from the Lehigh Career and Technical Institute, so we're very fortunate to have her with us today and to share her knowledge. And we want to also make sure that we hear from you throughout the session. So we encourage you, if you have questions or comments or ideas that you would like to share, we want to make this session as interactive as we can. So please make use of your control panel. You have a raise your hand icon, the high five sign. If you would like to share some information or a question, please click on that. Or also the question box. Feel free to type in any comments or questions there. In fact, if we could ask you, if anyone is sharing a connection with a colleague, if there are more than one of you using the same computer today, please type all of your names into that question box so that we can make sure to give you credit for attending today's session. I also wanted to mention that we have one other team member with us today. Candace Dickover is a new team member with Meter Consulting, and she is online with us also. She'll be helping to monitor questions and comments. So please keep in touch with us during the session. I just want to do a quick tech check to make sure everyone can hear me and everyone is connected. So if you would please click on the raise your hand icon if you are able to hear my voice this morning. I see Jared, Jeremy, Ken, great. Mike, Nicole, most hands going up. That is good news. Happy to know that everyone is connected and is able to hear us, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from you as well in a little bit. So thank you, everyone. Okay, next slide, please. So a quick overview of what we'll be covering today, our check-in, which we're doing right now. We're going to talk about some technical reading skills and strategies, then followed by some technical writing activities and strategies, a follow-up activity for you to consider, and then an open forum. So that's an opportunity for you to share questions, experiences that you've had. We also encourage you to do that throughout the session. As I mentioned, we'll be taking breaks and pauses to get questions and feedback from you. So please feel free to do that throughout the session as well as at the end with our open forum.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. This is Kathy, everyone. How's everyone doing? I know you're all on mute, but I'll assume from the wave of hands and from the whole idea that you logged on that you're doing well. Crazy weather here in Pennsylvania. If you were the plumbing group, I would have to open up with my 6 million questions on what to do with a frozen pipe, which we dealt with yesterday in our home. But I am happy to report it defrosted. It didn't burst. At least we don't think so. So anyway, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. This is Kathy Schick, and glad to be here. Our speaker, Joanne Custer, is not with us today, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Joanne. She'll be doing our other sessions with us. I wanted to give her a shout out because she did contribute some ideas and information for this session and some of the slides themselves. So Joanne, wherever you are, and I know you're at a conference somewhere, I hope you're warm. So let's get started. I have a poll that I'd like to begin with. And by the way, if you're new to the webinar, I'm looking at the names, they all look familiar to me, but you are on mute. I think Jennifer said that. You are on mute, but you certainly can be taken off mute. I'm very casual about the way I facilitate, so please put any questions or comments in the chat box. You know, the slides will be emailed to you after the session, so just feel free to sit back and relax and just participate. Okay, so for my poll, let me see if I can launch it. I hope you can see this. You know, for some reason I can't. So, Jennifer, are you able to see the
I can see it, Kathy. Yep.
Can you read it? I can't see it.
Sure. So we have a poll here, and we're just curious to get some quick information from you. The statement is, our textbook is written at a level the majority of students can comprehend. And what we ask you to do is read through the 3 options of responses there, and please click on the one that is most applicable to your classroom.
Thank you. We only have 20. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to read the 3 choices. So choice number 1 is, I agree. Students have no trouble reading text independently. Second is, students typically need some support to understand the text. Or, I disagree, text is above the reading level of most students. So please click on the answer that is most applicable.
We'll give it, we almost have everyone's vote in. Give it just another minute. Okay, I have to tell you, I am a little surprised by this. Let me close the poll and share the results with you. So I'm not surprised at all that students typically need some support, but I'm surprised that no one felt the text was above the reading level. Now I work, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I'm fighting losing my voice the past couple of days. I work at Lehigh Career and Technical Institute, and we have quite a large population of English as second language learners. So we have a lot of difficulty with students for whom the textbook is simply above their reading level, and we know that not just anecdotally, we know that from doing some reading assessment. So I'm pleased to see that none of you apparently have that problem, but you are getting some support, and that's great. The textbooks, believe it or not, for career and technical education are among the most challenging reading levels in K-12 education. There have been quite a few studies done of the Lexile levels of textbooks. And because so many of the career and tech textbooks are actually written for community college level, you know, a lot of our students are locked out of understanding the textbooks. And really, it's ironic when the reputation, as you know, and this is certainly not to be insulting, but this is what one of the things we've struggled with in CTE, is the reputation is it's for kids who are just all about hands-on, and yet we're giving them some of the most challenging reading. I'm going to change my screen here a little bit, and again, I apologize for coughing so much. We're going to start with talking about technical reading, and as I prefaced in the last webinar, if you attended, please keep in mind, it is really difficult to prepare material for people across the state. Some of you have been teaching 1 year, and some of you are in your 20th year of teaching or more. We're at all different levels of understanding. We have all different types of levels of students. So I know this information is somewhat general. The hope is today that it just might spark a renewed interest in how you assign technical reading and writing, or maybe give you a new idea, or maybe just affirm that you're doing things pretty well, which I'm sure you are. Okay, so for any reading assignment, and by that I'm focusing mostly on textbook, although this could also be trade journal or something else that's not coming to mind right now. Think about what you can do to help students fully access the text. And we're going to talk about before reading, during reading, and after reading. So technical reading before you even put the text in the kids' hands. Always make sure that you're setting a purpose for the reading and activating prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is especially important with our English language learners and with our socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So students who are coming from a home life where maybe they were not read to, they didn't take trips to different places, they just don't have a wide range. So for example, thinking of an elementary age student, if you start reading a book about a circus and a student has never heard of or been to a circus, that limits their understanding from the start. So think through the activity, the reading passage, before you assign it. Why am I having the students read this? What do they already know coming into this? What does it relate to? We know through brain research that our brains connect new learning to known learning. We connect the new to the known. So, and that's no matter what we're learning. If you're cooking a new recipe or whatever, you're using a new tool, our brain always seeks to make connections. So if you can bring those connections forth or brainstorm them a little bit first, that's a huge help for where that new learning will land when picked up through reading. Think about what is important to know and learn. What is your target for this reading passage that you're about to use? Who is the author and what is his or her purpose? So that's important for kids, and that's also sort of a big thing in Common Core, is that kids understand the source. Is it a primary source? Is it an opinion piece? Is it from a textbook? Who are the editors? What year was this written? If it is a journal, is it sponsored by an advertisement? And if so, what might their agenda be? We want kids to think deeper about the information they're reading and what level of credibility to place in it. And then,
excuse me, Kathy, this is Jennifer. Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I'm not sure if you closed out the poll. We're looking at still. At least I still see the poll slide.
I am
there we
so
go.
sorry. Are you the only person that said that? You mean everyone didn't rush to put that in the comment box?
Well, I think they were still considering their responses. So, anyway, we're good now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You know, I thought you were going to say, excuse me, Kathy, but there's no one on the line anymore. You know, when you do this in a quiet room all by yourself, you start wondering, am I talking to anyone? 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 Remember the Ferris Bueller movie? Anyway, so how are we going to read this? Am I going to assign this independently, or does this piece seem a little more challenging? Will we read this in chunks? Will we read this in a group, in small groups? How are we going to read this? And then also before reading, it's really important to start front-loading your vocabulary. You may be familiar with this term, but I know it still confuses people even after we do full workshops on it. But the difference between explicit vocabulary instruction and implicit vocabulary instruction, it's important to note here, we as a teaching profession must do a better job of explicit vocabulary instruction. And by that we mean really stopping and working on the word or the term, not just using it in speech and quickly saying, oh, that means X. That's implicit, to sort of implicitly expect that someone will understand it if I just quickly tell them what it means. Explicit is when you're very clear, we stop, we talk about the word, we say the word, we create our own definitions. That's really important, as we'll see throughout this conversation today. So what technical terms in this reading passage may be unfamiliar? And just as importantly, what academic words, words like consequently, or paradoxically, or basic academic words that may trip students to the point that they are not able to make sense of the sentence. And those don't really have to be taught explicitly. Those you might want to implicitly make sure you explain as you're going through the text. And then always pointing out to students, what are the textbook features that are there to support the reader? For example, this textbook uses red font when it's a word that is found in the glossary. I always recommend that before you start the school year, before you start using the textbook, you do a whole lesson on how is our textbook set up? What does the blueprint mean? How many graphics are there? What year was it written? That kind of thing. But certainly vocabulary. Okay, so a couple of, and Jennifer, please do interrupt me if there are any comments or questions. Also, before reading, when we talk about front-loading vocabulary, one idea, I don't know how many of you were at Penn State with us, but for those of you that were, you might remember I had you quickly make a pinch card, and that is simply taking a piece of paper, it can be the handout you have in front of you, and folding it, you don't even have to fold it, but it just makes it a little more sturdy, and folding it the long way, and have students write 1 at the top, 2 in the middle, and 3 at the bottom. And then you might read some new words and say, if you feel you're an expert at this word, I want you to pinch 3. If you feel you've heard the word, but you're not an expert, you really couldn't explain it, pinch 2. And pinch 1 if you don't know this word at all yet. And then you could run through some words, and that's for you to get an idea of how much explicit instruction do I need to spend on different words. You can also do that on a handout. I know a lot of teachers make short half-paper handouts of new words and have the kids rate the word right on the handout, 3, 2, or 1. And my suggestion for that is make sure that you have kids, after they complete that, turn and talk. So I'm turning to my neighbor and saying, wait, you have you knew this word? I don't know that word. What does it mean? And just get them talking about the word. One of the reasons explicit vocabulary instruction is so important is we know, and different researchers use different numbers, but they're all somewhere between 9 and 18. It takes that many times to interact with a new word before a person is able to retain it and actually use it. So if we're simply just saying, oh, that word means this, and moving on, we're missing the chance to really plant that word. So always display your new words. Our visual learners need to see the word, not just hear it. Require students to say the word. I bet this sounds silly to you if you don't do it, but I want to tell you about a teacher that I work with. His name is Claude Cole, and he teaches law enforcement at Lehigh. And we went to a workshop with Anita Archer, a real expert in vocabulary instruction, and she was adamant that kids must chant new words. And Claude Cole is a retired Allentown police lieutenant, detective. He helped found their SWAT team. This is a real man's man kind of guy. And if you would believe it, he came back and he started using this because he has a lot of Latin words that he used to use in law. And the kids are great with it, and he felt it really worked. So he will do something like this. He'll have the new word on the wall. He'll talk about the new word. They'll have a discussion about the new word. And then he'll say, and the word is, and then he puts his hands out to show that it's their turn to talk, and they yell, reinforcement, and then he'll say the word is again, and they say it, and they say it 2 or 3 times the first few days that he's using that word. He also puts the word up in Spanish if it's similar, if it's a cognate, because a lot of Spanish words are similar to the English word. So that also can help some of the students make a connection. Use new words frequently and require students to use them. I know some teachers who the first, if it's the beginning of a unit and they have some new words on their word wall or post-it, they will give points for students who are caught using those words in writing or in speech. And always, always use student-friendly definitions. The definitions that are in textbooks or in the dictionary are often inaccessible to students, especially for academic words. So always try to form a definition that the students agree on, that everyone understands, and that is in your own words or their own words. Any questions or comments about vocabulary or anything you'd like to share? All right, then let me throw a new poll. How are we doing out there? Somebody just needs to type in and say, we're here, we're okay, while I put my hand
everyone is tuned in, but we haven't had any questions or comments yet so far. So please let us know if you disagree with something, if you have another example to share. We'd love to hear from you and give you the opportunity to speak with each other.
All right, now there should be a new poll up, and I hope someone reminds me to put it down, besides nice Jennifer. You can answer more than one, but let us know, what are you, I think it says, what do you use for vocabulary instruction? So please, lots of word walls, that's good. Please vote. We have just a few of you checking in so far. Good, getting more. And we have almost everyone. Let me close the poll and share the results. I have to tell you, I started my teaching career, actually my very first year of teaching, I taught kindergarten, which, boy, if you want to, that's a young person's sport. I don't think I could ever do it again, but what a lot of fun. For the majority of my elementary career, though, I taught first grade, and word walls, and I'm talking about the late 80s, early 90s, word walls were like the new big thing, and my husband at that time was teaching high school, and if you would have told me 20 years ago that my husband would have a word wall, I would have laughed, and now he does. That man certainly does. So they've really proven themselves to be quite useful. Review games. I love this, that so many of you are labeling your tools and equipment throughout your room. I love that. That's just wonderful. And look, 70% almost keep a vocabulary journal. Great. Now, that 23% of other things you do, we'd love to know what that is. So either type some things in or save that for our open forum in just a few minutes. Okay, so you should no longer see the results. Am I right?
That's right. We're back to the vocabulary factoid.
Okay, I'm going to move on to some strategies during reading. And Jennifer, we have until what time? 10:30?
10:45.
10:45, okay. If this strategy, you might know it by a different name. If this strategy is new to you, I really encourage you to talk to your instructional coach or do some Googling with this. This is, I call it the think aloud, the read aloud, think aloud. This strategy seems too good to be true because it seems so easy. And I have worked with teachers, both CTE and actually an English teacher and a social studies teacher, who said it really changed the way their students were reading tests. So read aloud is simply you modeling reading. And if that intimidates you, it won't after you do it a few times. So here's what you do. Let's say you're going to be reading, or you want your students to read the next 3 pages of the textbook. You might start that reading with you reading the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. Now, instead of just doing it, you need to say to the kids, I'm going to read aloud the first few paragraphs because I want you to see and hear what a proficient reader does as he reads. I'm going to let you see what's going on in my mind, what I'm thinking as I'm reading. I know this sounds strange, but this is what research tells us about struggling readers. They don't know. It's like magic to them that some people can read so well. They don't have these little metacognitive strategies. So as you read, you're saying things like, you start reading and then you say, you know, I'm going to read this section more slowly. This has a lot of words are new to me. And then you slow your reading down. And then you read a little bit and say something like, I need to take a minute here and look at the graph because that will really help me understand the data. And then you think out loud while you're looking at the graph. Or I'm going to reread that part. It didn't make sense to me the first time. And then you reread it. And then you say out loud, kind of to yourself, oh, I get it. That meant X. So you can look down this list I have of examples. This is making the unknown known. This is giving kids a little window into your mind on, oh, I get it. This is also a great tool to use as you're teaching complex math problems that you may use in your lab. So formulas and things. So you're doing the process, but at the same time, you're giving them little insight into what goes on in your mind. It's a really powerful strategy. And then the next piece of it, I have 2 bookmarks that will come along with your with the PowerPoint slides. And this is what the bookmarks look like. On the left is the bookmark for you, the teacher. So you might want to stick this in your textbook and stick one in your lesson planning book or whatever. And these are just some think aloud possibilities that as you're reading aloud, you're pausing and making these statements. And then the other bookmark on the right-hand side, after you use the think aloud strategy for a few times at least, then you might say to the students, I'm going to give you a bookmark, and I want you to keep it next to you as you read today's article. And as you read today's article, I want you to use these annotations. So if something surprises you or is new information, I want you to put an exclamation mark next to it. Or if it seems like important information, put a star. Or if it's something you don't understand, put a question mark. And if it's a textbook and they can't write in it, then certainly hand out Post-it notes. But now now the hope is they're doing what you've been doing. They start reading and thinking, and now they're actually annotating where they were doing their thinking. And then at the end of the passage, then you can have them say, let's talk about this passage. Who had an exclamation mark somewhere in their passage? Where was your exclamation mark? What surprised you? What was new? And you do a brief share out. Who had an area that they didn't understand? Could someone else in the room explain that? And it's just a way to get kids engaging more with text. That's called annotating text. So there are many different ways you can do this. And again, this is how we say, okay, you're not a reading teacher. My husband's a health teacher. He's not a reading teacher. But we still are responsible for helping kids improve their reading ability. So you're not taking time away from your class and saying, let's today work on how to look up a word you may not know. You're not per se teaching reading, but as you're doing reading, you're making sure that you are supporting their reading growth. I hope that makes sense. Let's talk about during reading. I fight with teachers a lot, and I'm willing to fight with you about this. Round robin. I do not like it. I did not like it 20 years ago. I do not like it today. I don't feel it's effective. But I know a lot of teachers in CTE default to it because it's what they remember in school. And I'm going to tell you, I have yet to see it done effectively. I'm not saying it hurts or and there's more effective ways to read text. What we find with round robin reading is kids sit there and look ahead to the passage that they can figure out will be theirs, and they work on that, and they don't listen to what is being read, or it just becomes a drone of reading. It's just, now I read, now he reads. It's very flat. It's not usually enjoyable. I have a very funny church story about my husband and I joining a new church, and this was about 20 years ago. And can you believe we were in this study group and we had to read the Bible in a round-robin fashion. And, you know, the Bible is not an easy read. And I remember looking over, and certainly there was my husband. He was already looking at the verse that he knew he'd have to read aloud. So it's exactly what I see in the classroom. So I would recommend, if you want that kind of student reading, maybe do a popcorn reading where you work with the kids to get into the habit of who wants to start, and you kind of train them that after a paragraph, or a couple paragraphs, depending on how you want to set it up, they go silent, and whoever feels like reading jumps in. And it's a very democratic way of giving kids the chance to read. And another way is, if you really want to have kids read, if you have someone who's not participating, maybe it's in the IEP that they need to participate more or something, just give kids a heads up. So you might want to go around to kids, put a note in their textbook with a Post-it note, you will be called on to read this paragraph today, so that they can at least look through it. And the other way you have kids read aloud in your classroom, we'd like to hear those. So Jennifer, if anything comes in, let me know.
I do have a question about this, Kathy, about the reading aloud. So do you recommend that the text that is being read aloud in class is something that the students maybe were assigned as a homework assignment to read the night before, or does this work best with fresh text? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Do you mean the read aloud technique that the teacher does?
I guess just in general.
If I'm using the read aloud technique, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. But on the reading aloud technique, I probably would make it a cold reading. In other words, a reading the kids didn't know. But if it's something that you know, hey, I know tomorrow in class we're going to read aloud these 3 pages. We're going to discuss them and read them aloud. I think it's a great idea to say, as homework tonight, I'd like you to look through this. We're hearing a lot about that whole flipped classroom where, for example, in math classes, kids are actually doing the learning at home with videos, and then in class they're only working on what didn't I understand from my video lesson last night, what problem could I not solve. So that's a little bit of a flipped classroom, and I like that, to say read this at home tonight, come prepared to discuss it tomorrow. And that way, if you do have kids, if you're calling on kids to read it, the presumption is they already had a chance to practice reading it. And that homework could be annotating the text. Read it tonight and annotate it with that bookmark we showed. Right.
Okay, and you got a nice affirmation from Mike Miller. He says, you are exactly correct on the round-robin reading. He does not use that strategy and never has.
Oh,
so
thank you,
Mike, for contributing.
I really, this is very ironic because, and I love this man. If any of you know Harry Miracle at Lehigh, who is one of the Autobody teachers, has fixed my daughter's car 3 times, love this man. But he is adamant about round-robin reading. He thinks it's wonderful, and he and I go head-to-head all the time. And we one time had a visitor at our school who's been in education 40 years, and he said, and I was so thrilled, he said in the presentation, round-robin reading wasn't good 40 years ago. It certainly isn't good now, and I was just thrilled, so thank you. All right, so students read independently and engage with the text during reading. That's really important. And again, I hate to keep bashing round-robin, but the old-fashioned round-robin where kids just read and moved on, there is no engagement, kids aren't learning anything from that. So we want kids, as they're reading, to be doing something. Are they taking notes? And if so, did you model for them what note-taking looks like and what you expect from their notes? Are they completing some sort of graphic organizer like an anticipation guide or a Venn diagram? Are they responding to questions that you put on the board as you read? Think about these 3 things. There needs to be, that goes back to setting that purpose. Before reading, you've set this all up. Now during reading, they're executing it. And by the way, if you are looking for a note-taking system, If you really are, your kids are struggling with taking notes, because we just, as human beings, do not inherently know how to take notes. Google the Cornell note-taking system. Cornell is in the university. There's a lot of blank templates. It's a great system. A lot of colleges use it, and it's a very good system. A lot of schools use it school-wide, like grade 5 and up. I mentioned an anticipation guide. I love anticipation guides. They're a little bit of upfront work for you. Again, Google this. You'll find a million different anticipation guide templates. But simply, you take some statements from the reading, and you set it up. Look at the first one. It says, agree, disagree. So here's the statement from the text that they have not yet read. Okay, this is before reading. You give this to them. The best tool to use for blank is blank. And obviously those blanks are filled in. I just didn't want to embarrass myself and try putting in Autobody words. So before they read, you go over these and you have them marked, do I agree or do I disagree, and why? So you do a little discussion, a little turn and talk work. Then during reading, they have their anticipation guide beside them and they're making corrections, or they're writing down, I changed my mind based on page number 2. It's always good to cite evidence. The next example of an anticipation guide. Before reading, before the text is in front of them, you want the students to say, is this true or false? My opinion, and then what is my opinion? And then the author, so now it's during reading, you're saying, well, here's what the author said, and here's the evidence the author cites. It's on this page or this paragraph. And here's my opinion. Now I might change my opinion from before reading, or I might leave it as it was. So this is another tool that helps kids stay engaged in the reading. You know, years ago we did a lot of having kids read and then having kids answer literal questions. And literal questions are questions that are right in the passage. For example, my dog wore a red hat. And then the kids would read the passage, and the question was, what color hat did the dog wear? Now, you know, you don't have to understand anything about that passage to be able to go back and get that information and get that answer correct. This is what the Common Core is trying to address. More rigor, more thinking, deeper and wider discussion, citing evidence, and engaging with text.
Kathy, this is Jennifer. May I interrupt you? We have a couple of folks who are giving some examples that come from the Max teaching program. For example, Ed comments that there's no round-robin reading in Max teaching, and Steve has added that Max teaching also uses an anticipation guide, and he has been using these with great results.
Great, thank you. Yes, I've been through some Max teaching workshops, and I remember, was his name Brian? I know it wasn't Mr. Forget, but anyway, he did some great things with anticipation guides. And again, I'm going to really age myself and tell you, who remembers the book, if you have young children, there was a book called Ira Sleeps Over. It was a great book. I remember using anticipation guides with first graders. The first one I made was with that book, Ira Sleeps Over, and the kids loved it. So these are not, the Max techniques are not new. They're still being promoted because they have great success with them, and they're fairly easy. Once you put together an anticipation guide, you have it. You know, so it's something you can refer back to. Okay, so after reading, so you've done some before reading work, then you've made sure kids are actively reading, and now after reading, you want to make sure that you follow up with a rigorous discussion, not literal questions, but comparing and contrasting and making kids go back to the text and challenge them. Well, where did the author say that? Why did the author say that? Well, how does the graph support that? You want them to go back to the text, dip back into it for evidence. And then what were the key terms that you think were important? I gave you some up front, but is there anything else that needs to be posted on the word wall? And if so, what do those words mean in this context? What else might that word mean in another context? And how about, turn and talk, discuss your notes, or share your graphic organizer with a partner. Turn and talk is very brief, and it's very powerful. The kids want to be heard. We all want to be heard. we all want to share our work. So make sure that you do that. And then a writing to learn, and we're going to go into that in just a minute. So I know you're all, I know there may not be a ton of reading assigned in Autobody and Collision, and I would really encourage you to stick with authentic reading, textbook reading, journals, current event articles, even blog posts that you find or editorials. But we do want to make sure there is a lot of reading as often as possible, and that you think through it. So you're paying attention. Before I give this assignment, what is my purpose? Going back to those before reading, the during reading, and then the after reading. Now I'm going to transition into writing. So how are we on time? Let's see, it's 12 after 10. Anything else you'd like to add about the reading before we do a real brief discussion on writing, and then we're going to open it up to hear what you have to say? Any questions before I transition here?
I don't see anything at the moment, Kathy.
Okay, I should have put this in a poll, but if I'd be curious to know if you use a program at your school called Collins Writing. Would you just let Jennifer know? I'm just curious. Lehigh started using Collins a few years ago and really liked it. And for some reason, that doesn't sound right to me. I feel like I'm using the wrong term.
We want anyone to raise their hand if they use that?
Yes, please. That's a good idea. Raise your hand if you use Collins Writing. It's a program. They actually have a book just for CTE, a booklet for CTE teachers, 5 levels of writing.
I see one hand raised. Jared Wheeler has his hand raised. Does anyone else use that program?
If you're appropriate to CTE, really appropriate to content teachers who are not English teachers, that still want to improve their writing. Okay, so thank you. We're going to look at 2 different kinds of writing, writing to learn and learning to write. Don't we as teachers come up with these great little ways of saying things? So writing to learn is short and appealing. The students are writing to solidify what they've learned. They are not writing to become better writers. They are not writing to improve their punctuation and spelling. They are simply writing to lock in new learning. It's supposed to be energizing, kind of wake kids up or stir them to new thinking. So here are some examples. So you might begin class with 5 minutes, and when I say 5 minutes, I mean you set a timer. And 5 minutes is a little bit long, by the way. I would do 3 to 4. 5 minutes of writing about yesterday's reading. And you tell the students, do not put your pen down until I say time is up. And if that means you only have 1 sentence that you can come up with, then keep writing that 1 sentence. And there's brain research behind that we won't go into, but nobody should put their pencil down. So another would be you're in the middle of a lecture, or maybe you're even out in the lab, you're in front, you're in the paint station or whatever that is called, and you're working on something, and they all have clipboards because they're supposed to be taking notes. And you might say, okay, listen, I want you to take the next 2 minutes, I'm watching the clock, and I want you to write down this procedure the way you would explain it to someone who just walked in this lab. I want you to list the 3 steps you would take. So it's a quick burst of writing. It's something they really shouldn't dread. It's more energizing. Or at the end of the lab, to ask students to give a 5-minute recap. I try to avoid the word summary. For some reason, that really scares kids, on what they did that day or what worked, what went wrong. And again, you might laugh at this, but I could list many, many teachers for you that are just like you who do this with great success. When you have kids doing these quick writes, or in Collins it's called level 1, type 1 and type 2 writing, when you have kids doing this, walk around and put a smiley face or a stamp or a sticker on their paper as they're doing it. They will respond to that. Yes, 18-year-old boys will say, where's my sticker? Or why don't you stamp my work? So there's always a perimeter. So you're going to write for 3 minutes, and I want you to write a minimum of 2 sentences, or at least 3 bullet points. So you give them a real purpose, and then it's very quick, and then it's a turn and talk, and it's a move on. So this writing it lacks form. It's not, they don't have to worry about spelling. You're not correcting spelling. You're not looking for any punctuation attention. It's a personal audience, and it's really to engage their mind. So it's brief bursts of writing.
Kathy, we had a note from Jared that what you were describing sounded to him like a focused free write.
Yes, 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 yes. And
we also had a...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I like about Collins writing is they give you a lot of writing prompts that are probably on the internet, a lot of starters and ideas, and I really like their attention to how many minutes you're going to be given and what is expected of you during that time. Go ahead.
That's okay, thank you. We have a couple other questions coming in, but I think we'll save them until our open comment section.
Okay, so you're writing to learn. Remember, this is your short burst of writing that you're doing to solidify your learning. That's daily. That could be several times a day. And here are some examples of what this would be. And this could be always a follow-up to a reading activity, but it doesn't have to be. And we want to talk about this, but as Jennifer said, we'll hold your questions so we can have a real sharing time soon. And then on the other side of that coin is learning to write. So how can I, as a CTE teacher, support and help kids strengthen their writing skills like an English teacher, but I don't want to give up my content time. So I want to make sure they're writing things that are authentic to my trade. And this should be weekly. They should have weekly opportunities to practice their writing. So it might be a lab report, an editorial, an incident report. It doesn't have to be long. It might be 3 paragraphs. Product comparison, a progress report. And again, going back to Collins writing, one of the great things about Collins writing for CTE teachers and non-English teachers, so social studies teachers, math teachers, the suggestion is that when you give an assignment like this, so let's say this week I would like you to write an editorial to the newspaper about whatever, and when you hand it in to me as the teacher, I'm correcting it for only 3 points. So you choose your 3 things that you're going to correct. Okay, so for this assignment, I'm looking for correct spelling. I'm looking for correct end of sentence punctuation. There must be an end of sentence punctuation. And I'm looking for 3 opinion statements to support your opinion in this editorial. And so your assignment is to write this editorial, and I want you to underline the 3 key points you're making, because as the person who's correcting all these, that will be easier for me. So you see, as the CTE teacher, I'm not going to correct it for everything. I don't have time, nor is that really what my focus is on writing. I picked these 3 things. I want correct spelling, I want end of sentence punctuation, and I want you to underline your 3 personal pieces of information or points in this editorial. Now, on another piece, you might say, I'm looking for correct use of, I know this sounds silly, but you might say, I notice everybody uses the incorrect spelling for their, T-H-E-I-R, T-H-E-Y-R-E, and so forth. So you might say, hey, in today's writing or this week's writing, I'm really looking for correct spelling of these 3 things. Or, you pick out based on their writing. But in other words, don't overwhelm yourself with, I'm looking for everything to be correct. And if you want to, let's say this editorial, you actually do want kids to submit it to the newspaper, then you look at that as the first draft. And then you hand it back and say, now go through it and correct for grammar and things like that. So in other words, you can contribute to improving students' writing using authentic writing to Autobody collision, and without being overwhelmed with feeling you have to correct everything. Put a focus on it. Focus on 1 or 2 or 3, no more than 3, correctable things, and one should always be sort of the content, you know, that they like if it's a product comparison, you tell them how many comparison points you want made. So technical writing differs from academic writing in that technical writing has a very specific audience and a very specific and identifiable purpose. So again, just like before you give a reading assignment, before you give a writing assignment, think this through and then discuss with the student who will be the audience for this and what are their needs. Would this be a customer? Would this be a product manager or a corporation? What purpose will they use it for? And what do they already know? What do they already have? What information? And then what is expected of them? Are they going to be expected to make a choice based on my document, based on my writing? Because that should all help you with the tone of your piece. And then have the students brainstorm before they write, either independently or in a small group or a partner, what they think the audience expects and what they know, and then determine the writing format and tone. Is this going to be very highly academic, and should my word choice be considered here, or is this very casual and written for a homeowner that I'm just trying to give some tips to? And how should I write this? Should I write this in paragraphs, or should I write this in bullets, or should this be a booklet or a brochure? And help the kids think those things through, all the while trying to stay true to what goes on in your trade. We would be remiss if we didn't just quickly mention some common core strategies that we've kind of talked about. Choosing vocabulary very strategically is important and strengthened in Common Core. Include primary sources and then compare those to secondary sources. We want kids, Common Core is really pushing kids not just to read something, but do something with what you read. Compare it, contrast it, build on it, argue it, so forth. Introduce 21st century sources. Are your students looking at blogs and websites and you know, there's a million things out there that not just trade journals in writing. We're hoping that teachers are asking much more thought-provoking questions, and you know what, as teachers, I do it and I bet you do it too. Once we get going, we just keep talking, and sometimes the best thing we can do is just be quiet and keep asking the questions. Don't give the answers, just keep asking the questions. And we want, Common Core tells us, we want students to be able to write argumentatively. We want them to be able to, because that's a higher brain function. We don't just want you to spit back out what you've just read. That really, who cares if you can write a summary of what you just read? We want you to be able to write a summary that includes your opinion and specific evidence from the text that you agree or disagree with, or someone else's opinion. So we are ready to go to shortly to our open forum, but let me quickly just say your next steps, and this is a big hope, but I'm gonna hope for it. I'm going to hope that your takeaway will be that you share a technical reading or writing assignment on your Autobody SAS forum. If that is you know, something you've forgotten about or forgotten how to do, just send me your writing assignment or writing strategy rather, and I will post it on the SAS forum for you. But if you have anything that you think you can, and you can write it in a way that others would understand, you know, succinctly enough, send it my way and I'll post it on SAS for you. And then of course we want you to register for the next webinar, which is about NOCTI, and we do not have a speaker lined up on purpose. We are going to ask you all to be the speakers and give much more input. So we'll be in touch with you about preparing for that session, which for you is February 11th in the afternoon. And now Joan Rivers is saying, can we talk? So let's go ahead and start fielding some of your questions and discussion. We have a good 15 minutes before we want to wrap up. So I really went through this quickly. There's so much more I could add, and I know there's so much you could add, and this is your chance. So let's hear. Jennifer, did you say there were some questions we can start with?
Yes, there are. I'd like to start with Darren Dale. He had typed in a question, and I confirmed with him that we could unmute him and let him ask it directly so that he can we make sure that we understand his question. So Darren, I've unmuted you. Are you able to say hello? I hope your microphone is working, Darren. I've unmuted you, but we're not hearing you quite yet.
I wonder if maybe he doesn't have a microphone on his computer.
Maybe not.
Or Darren, is it muted maybe?
Okay. Well, let me go ahead and ask his question, and then perhaps if we can figure out the audio, if he has a follow-up. But what Darren had asked is, he typed in, we use a lot of iCar disks that are like PowerPoint presentations. And iCar is an acronym I-CAR. Do you see any different challenges for this style of instruction? So I guess, in general, I believe that some of the textbooks come with those pre-populated PowerPoint presentations. Do you have any thoughts on those and perhaps any recommendations?
I have some experience with that in the health. At Lehigh, we have a really successful senior-only program for students to attend Penn State, our local Lehigh Valley campus. And I sat in, so these were real high flyer students, and so many of them were really not doing well with this Penn State class. And their parents are paying a lot of money for them to get these credits. So I went and sat in on 2 or 3 of the classes. And that's the kind of PowerPoints that the instructor was using. It was for anatomy. And it came with the publisher. I found it to be extremely text dense. Each PowerPoint slide had so much text on it. It was overwhelming visually. And then the instructor, the professor, was handing that out so that the students had the whole packet in front of them. And what I observed was the great majority of the students were totally tuning out. Well, first of all, it was very hard. It was kind of dry. And when I worked with the students afterwards, what came out was many of them felt I really didn't need to listen because I have the whole packet. I can look at this in my own time. So if I'm understanding Darren correctly, and if we're thinking about the same things, I think there are challenges for using that kind of instruction. I think I would really ask if you have an instructional coach or a peer, a mentor, or an administrator that you like working with in this kind of case, ask someone to come in and watch your students as you're using those, I'm going to call it a PowerPoint, but as you're using that presentation style, and try to determine, are kids engaged? Is it too much text? See what, talk to the kids about it. You might need to break that up. You might need to pull those apart and present less at a time. You might not want them to have that information in front of them while you're showing it, while you're displaying it. And there's controversy about that. Some people say they have to have it in front of them to take notes on. So I will agree, I think there are different challenges with that canned kind of presentation. I think that, for me, I think the challenge is getting kids to engage in it. So I think you have to bring more of yourself to it. Can anyone else piggyback off of that?
Is there anyone else who has any experience or questions related to that? Please raise your hand or type your comment into the question box.
And again, I'll go back to those iCar discs. They may have been created for a technical college level or an adult education level. We still are dealing with high school kids, so we want to make it as engaging as we can. Well, let's ask for some feedback then. There were about 20% of you that said you do something other than the things I had listed for vocabulary. So can you start sharing, or if you want to be unmuted, let us know, what do you do for vocabulary instruction to support all these technical terms that CTE kids have to learn?
Was that Was that on a poll, Kathy? Were those examples, or was
Yes.
did you have a slide we could
Oh,
prompt
you're still
one?
looking. Yeah, you're looking at my screen, right? And it doesn't look great. Let me see if I can go back to it. Oh, I don't have the poll anymore. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we had talked about.
We had certain things. We had a word wall. We had, what were some of the other?
You know, maybe I can repost that. Hold on. Oh, that's the comprehension. Okay, let's see if we can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd love to hear a couple of things. I'd love to hear anything about your vocabulary journal. I do know some teachers that do that. I'd like to know, are you having kids draw in that and, you know, put, what do they put for their vocabulary? If you know what a Frayer model is, I love that a Frayer model, it's a vocabulary graphic organizer. It requires the student not just to define the word or the term in their own words, define it, but also to do a visual, so do a drawing, a sketch, or even cut and paste a picture in there, so there's always a visual as well. And then there's an example of its use and a non-example. So if the tool is used for this but never use it for that, that's also part of the vocabulary explanation. So I'd love to hear what you have kids put in that journal and how you organize that. And that might be what you want to share when we ask you to share something. It might be a page from your student's journal. And I'd also like to know what this other, what else do you do for vocabulary? And probably what everybody wants to know are what the review games are that you do. But
okay. Kathy, we have Ken with his hand raised, so I'm going to try unmuting you, Ken. Good morning, Ken. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, as far as the vocabulary words, what we do is I have the students do a chapter preview when we start a new chapter, and part of the chapter preview is they're supposed to list 6 vocabulary words that they're unfamiliar with the definition, and they give me a speculated definition. So they look at the word and they try to come up with a definition that looks like it would fit the word. And I review these before we actually go into the content of the chapter, and that way I can see which words are giving the majority of the students an issue, and then we go over the actual definition after that.
that's great. And that, you know, we hear the term formative assessment all the time, and that's a great example of a very quick and easy formative assessment. You're trying to take the pulse on what do the kids know, and how will I adjust my instruction to what I see them knowing. Great. And I just want to point out, wow, I am losing my voice. Ken used the word speculated. Perfect example of an academic vocabulary word that kids may or may not know, and I'm glad he used that word. We need to use those more advanced academic words in our language with kids. So great all around. Thanks for sharing, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Jennifer. Would you please just remind us which tech center you teach at, and then also which textbook or curriculum you use?
Yeah, I teach at Erie County Tech School, and we're using the Motors Collision Repair Guide.
Okay, great. Thanks for your comment. Did you have anything else you wanted to share?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or share an idea or an example, something they use related to vocabulary, or any of the other strategies that we've talked about today? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the question box here. Looks like we have another example of a vocabulary activity that comes from Mike Miller, and I'll just go ahead and read it. He says, I found that it is important that students write notes according to lessons and my notes on the board. At times, I do not give out handouts until the end of the lesson. Students at times get lazy when handouts are constant. If students see it, hear it, and then write it, Retention is higher on the material. Also, students will perform when they know the answer to the question why, such as why do I need to know, or why do I need this? So thank you, Mike, for that comment. Kathy, any thoughts on that?
I agree with that, and I know there are two very different schools of thought here, but I agree. I think when kids are given all the notes up front, I don't even think just kids. I think even us as adults, when we know we have it in front of us, what's the incentive to really engage in it at that moment? So I like the idea of giving it at the end. I know there are some students for whom their IEPs require that they have those notes ahead of time, or English language learners really should not be expected to take those notes. They should be given notes. But I think as long as you cover those bases, I agree. And there's another reason for looking into, if you don't know about Cornell notes, look into the template for Cornell notes. It's a very nice, easy structure to teach kids. It's basically dividing, let me see, I always get this mixed up, vertically, up and down, making a column on the left, and for 1/3 of the paper, and the remaining 2/3 of the paper is where you take your notes. So on the left-hand column, the note taker simply writes the main topic, and then on the other side of the line, on the right, they write or draw any notes about that topic. So it's a great note-taking format. And then at the bottom of every page, they write a quick review of what's important on that page. And I'm describing it very, very poorly, but it's a good template. So if your kids were expected to take notes in a format like that while you're presenting, then at the end of the lesson, or maybe even the next day after they do a quick review of it, then you give out your fleshed out notes. Now they have a complete package. They have their own thoughts and what they heard and keyed into, and they have your notes to flesh it out. So, I like that idea.
Okay, and we had a follow-up comment from Darren related to the discussion about using the PowerPoint type materials. He says, or he types, what I do with the PowerPoint is I show the slide and we discuss all of the information before we even think about taking notes. I usually break down the info into smaller chunks for their notes. The PowerPoints do not lend much for student participation. So thank you, Darren, for sharing that.
Yeah, I think I can visualize what you're talking about, Darren. I think I also saw in a manufacturing lab similar PowerPoints. I think you're doing the right thing by really breaking it down and not presenting it really the way that it's there. It's just a little bit too much, I think. And I think when you say before you do anything, you discuss it. I like the idea of look, there's a lot of text on this PowerPoint slide. Now that we've talked about it, what are 3 key points that are the takeaway here? Having the kids actually synthesize that information. And one last thought about notes, by the way. I know it's easy for us to do this as teachers. Really, I don't know why, but for some reason I saw this a lot. I used to be a middle school ESL teacher, and I saw this a lot in middle school. Teachers that literally write the outline or the notes on the board, and the kids are simply just copying it word for word. Another example, kind of like round robin of, is it hurting anyone? Probably not. But is it a good use of time? Probably not. So, if you want kids to have your notes, I'm all on board for it. Just hand them out to them. Don't make them copy them. But as I said, I wouldn't hand them out to them until that information has already been explained and taught.
Okay. I don't see any additional hands raised or comments. We have a few minutes remaining. Are there any wrap-up items?
Don't forget to register for your next webinar. I'll tell you what, I'll be sending out, and I'm sorry to say this, but it probably will be this weekend, not later today. I'm going to send you a follow-up to this webinar. It will include the PowerPoint slides. It will include the 2 bookmarks, and I mean, obviously, if you don't want those, just disregard. And it will include the registration for the February session, and maybe even what we need from you for that session for NOCTI. So please, as soon as you get that email, next week sometime, please go ahead and register for the next session so we have a good head count ahead of time.
Okay. Well, thank you all again for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to hear from us and to share with each other. We certainly hope that you heard some strategies that will be helpful for you as you go back into your classrooms and help your students with reading and understanding and writing about the material that's going to help them with their program. So thanks again. And we did record the session today, so we'll also include information about how you can access that online if you'd like to go back and review it, or if you have colleagues who were not able to participate today and they would like to listen in. So we'll share that information as well. Thanks, everyone, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Stay